I am the Space Quest Historian. People sometimes send me keys to free games hoping I'll give them some free exposure, which is fair enough. If I was making a game, I'd try and do the same, but unfortunately these poor souls may or may not be getting more than what they bargained for, because I'm not just going to tell you that these games exist and read off their press releases like a dancing monkey. I'm going to give you my honest opinions about whether or not I think these games will be worth your time, and, well, I think at least one of the devs on the roster for this episode might regret that decision. But hey, I'm not a walking advertisement billboard. If they're going to drop in unannounced on me, then that's what they get. And I want to be clear about this. I didn't solicit any of these games. I didn't write to the devs and say, hey, I'm a big shot YouTuber, give me a copy of your game for free, because first of all, that would be a lie. And second, I've already got my hands full with a million other things, so I don't actually need more games to play. Also, I don't know any of these devs personally. In fact, I didn't even know these games existed until they showed up unannounced on my electronic doorstep, so there's no nepotism here. But anyway, this is how things are going to work. I played 4 games that people sent to me out of the blue and of their own free will for as long as I felt like, until either I got bored or made it to the end. And I'll have an amount of time played counter on the title cards before each of the games, so you can take that into account for whatever that's worth. Now, normally I'd either have a few people play these games alongside me, so there would at least be like a second or third opinion to balance things out, or I would at least live stream my playthrough so people in the chat could weigh in along the way, but this time around I didn't, so yeah, this is going to be a pretty one-sided affair. Like, maybe I should rebrand the series or something, but anyway. Lastly, of course, my opinions may or may not align with yours, so if you feel like I gave one of these games an unfair shake or have a different opinion, then, I don't know, keep it to yourself. I don't give a fuck, really. These are my first impressions of these games, and first impressions matter, but they're also wholly subjective, so that's that, really. Let's get into it. This game was sent to me by a fellow called Auguste Getzalian. I undoubtedly just butchered that pronunciation. My apologies. He developed it with his friend John Thomas Eubank IV, a very prestigious sounding name if I ever heard one, and also one that's a lot easier to say out loud. Alright, let's get the obvious thing out of the way first. This looks like a fucking MS Paint nightmare. The controls are janky as fuck, the dialogue is riddled with weird grammar and pointless absurdities that go nowhere. It just looks and plays like something cobbled together over a high school lunch break in Visual Basic circa 1997. And yet, once you get past the initial shock and revulsion, there's an undeniable charm to it, which honestly caught me off guard a bit. You play as a lowly janitor in a greasy space fast food joint, so yeah, kind of obvious Roger Wilco syndrome, except you're somehow even lower on the occupational food chain. After completing the first set of puzzles that involve tidying up this backwater shithole as best you can, you're then, for no reason whatsoever, invited to join a spaceship that's docked near the restaurant. Your manager at the restaurant doesn't bat a fucking eye. In fact, he actively encourages you to do so. And once you're there, the captain welcomes you and assigns you to your new quarters, which are just an empty cell in the break next to 3 religious fanatics and a space chicken. And it was around this point that the aforementioned hidden charm of the game started to become apparent to me, and instead of just playing the game for 20 minutes like I'd intended to, I actually ended up spending an hour playing through the entire thing. Not long after arriving, the ship malfunctions and the prisoners in the brig escape. Again, for no readily explored reason, it's now up to you to find them and shove them back behind bars. And what kept me going throughout the game was that despite its absolutely bare-bones story and frankly horrifying visuals, the puzzles in this game are actually pretty good. They're not too difficult, but they offer just enough of a challenge to keep you occupied, and they're not as obtuse or nonsensical as the amateurish presentation would lead you to assume. This coffee puzzle had me engaged for quite a while. You have to put 6 units of coffee in the coffee maker, but the cups in the coffee pot can only hold 3, 5, and 10 units respectively, so you have to pour this shit back and forth until you get the correct amount. This keypad thingy has you solve a fairly simple mathematical puzzle that nevertheless left me feeling pretty clever by the end, because I am unforgivably shit with numbers. And honestly, the humor is pretty endearing as well. Case in point, the escaped space chicken ends up getting roasted, but you stick it back in the brick cell anyway because, you know, why not? Like I said, it only took me an hour to get through, and it's not what you might call a hidden gem or even a diamond in the rough. It's more of a slapdash mess of garish art and dialogue that seems to have been written by one of the guys rolling his head on the keyboard, but there's some surprisingly good puzzle design in here. Would I recommend it? Probably not, but I had a fun hour playing it, and if the other 2 episodes get their shit together a little more on the presentation side, then I might say give it a go. It's certainly a lot better than this next pile of shit. In this game, you play as a catastrophically unpopular high school girl named Yuki who wants to, well, become popular. Apparently there's also a mystery later on in the game, but I couldn't bring myself to play that far. I only lasted half an hour playing this game because I just couldn't fucking take it anymore. First of all, apparently the game is set in Japan and is very much inspired by the sort of slice-of-life anime where some hapless protagonist gets endlessly dunked on by their peers and has to, I don't know, put them in their place or something. I honestly couldn't give less of a shit. What threw me off at first is that despite the characters and setting being very inspired by the sort of cringy, bad writing you'd expect from a low-budget teen anime drama, nothing in this game looks even the slightest bit like an anime. Instead, the game goes for this super chunky pixel art style that other games like Darkside Detective and Phantom Fellows have done really well, but this game just doesn't do it well at all. The pixel art is terribly inconsistent throughout. Yuki's house is drawn in these giant Lego-sized pixels, but once you get outside, it gets more into the sort of 320 by 200 VGA-esque style, and somehow both manage to look incredibly shit, and it's also very clear that they're actually running in a very high resolution because Yuki's sprite doesn't move along the same grid pattern as the background. She just sort of floats in between. The first puzzle, if you want to call it that, is to simply pick up your bus pass and take the bus to school. This had me stumped for quite a while until I realized, after restarting the game, that the game had just bugged out and left the map hotspot entirely disabled. Yeah, off to a great start, guys. The game is also full of weird glitches. Characters will be present during a screen transition but then pop out of existence after the screen is fully loaded. This conversation with your friend outside your house can happen from several yards away if you reload your save because the devs forgot to check where Yuki is standing before running the scripted sequence, and I'm somehow able to endlessly search this dude's back and come up with a roll of duct tape until the end of time. And then there's the puzzle combat mechanic, where you engage an enemy NPC in battle by trading insults via social media and seeing who scores the most likes. Yeah, I think this is supposed to be some sort of modern equivalent of the insult sword fighting mechanic from Monkey Island, but this shit just makes my fucking skin crawl. This is where the game just lost me completely. And hey, listen, I've watched a lot of cringy anime in my time. I have unironically watched and enjoyed copious amounts of Ranma 1/2 and Love Hina back in the day, not to mention pitch black whinge fests like Neon Genesis and Evangelion, so I'm no stranger to this sort of shit, but Love Me or Die is just bottom shelf weeaboo cringe that falls flat on its face right out of the fucking gate. Would I recommend? Absolutely not. Even if this sort of teenage popularity drama is your thing, this game is just broken and unpolished to a degree where I feel you'd just be wasting your money and your time. Moving on. This game is apparently the third installment in a series, but the developer failed to mention this in his email, so I just dove right in and didn't do any due diligence. So apologies to all Brownie fans out there, but I went in with absolutely no fucking context. And it wasn't until I got irrevocably stuck in this game and tried looking up a walkthrough that I realized it was part of a greater epic. The opening narration, which is the only part of the demo that's fully voiced, says that two worlds, our boring, normal human world and a parallel world full of magic and wizards and elves and shit, have merged, so now humans and fairy tale beings can hop back and forth between worlds and annoy each other. This game takes place in the quote-unquote magic world, so I think all this intricate backstory is just to explain why our main protagonist, Brownie the Wizard, has a television. It's one of those games where the humor and wacky situations take the forefront and the story's actually pretty pointless, so your enjoyment of the game boils down to whether or not you think the humor is funny. And the humor in this game is very British, so all in all, this is just your standard Discworld meets Simon the Sorcerer type affair, except One of the things that caught my attention right off the bat is that this game swears, like, a lot, way more than I do, and that's saying something. Even the children in this game have incredibly filthy vocabularies, which, of course, I think is fucking hilarious, but your mileage may vary on this one, especially if you're one of those dipshits who keep leaving me comments about why I should stop swearing on my channel. So, even though I despise the fantasy genre with a burning passion, a lot of the humor in this game is right up my alley, since it seems to take the piss out of fantasy tropes with reckless abandon. Granted, the aforementioned Discworld and Sam the Sorcerer games did the same, but none of them were as unhinged as this game. The monster guarding the bridge is described as an unspeakable abomination who's also a multi-level marketing agent, aka a pyramid scheme peddler, and there's a racist mayor who wants to deport all humans from the magical world, but is also openly taking corporate bribes from soft drink companies. Oh, and there's a talking plant named David Bowie, which Urban Dictionary tells me is a slang for a stuck-up twat, who regales you with folk music with appalling death metal vocals. Shit like this is right up my alley, so I was actually having a very good time with Brownie's adventure until I got stuck. Like, really stuck. Bowie here acts as a hint giver, although he'll only give you one hint in exchange for a particular sort of flower, and as far as I can tell, there's only one of these flowers in the game, so you have to pick very carefully what puzzle you want a hint for. I just save scummed that and got a hint for all the puzzles I was stuck on. But anyway, one of the hints said I should collect some toxic waste in a boot, which I found odd because all the other puzzles up until this point have been quite straightforward and nowhere near as moon logic-y as some fantasy adventures we could mention, but this one seemed to go against all common sense. And there's a toxic waste barrel on the beach, but that wasn't good enough, so I spent ages walking back and forth between locations looking for a more suitable place to fill my boot, but to no avail. Eventually I had to just give up after playing for nearly an hour, which sucked because this is actually just a demo of the full game, and I really wanted to be able to at least complete the demo before giving my verdict, but sadly I am unable to, and that really sucks because, as we all know, humor tends to get very stale when you just repeat the same jokes over and over again, and that's what happens when you get stuck in what is predominantly a jokey sort of game. So yeah, my recommendation of this game is tempered by the caveat that you may or may not find the abundant swearing and fairly sharp-edged satire humorous, and also that the game apparently decides to veer off into moon logic territory fairly early on, despite easing you into the game with some pretty logical and easygoing puzzles. Obviously, the presentation is another thing, but the somewhat amateurish graphics and animation didn't actually get in the way for me when I was playing. A game like this lives and dies by whether or not it gets a chuckle out of you, and I'd rather take an ugly, funny game over a beautiful but boring one. The sound design is actually surprisingly good, but according to the dev, he's a folk musician by trade and has enlisted the help of a professional sound designer, so, I don't know, props to that bit. Maybe he should have partnered up with an experienced graphic designer as well while he was at it, but again, that didn't really bother me too much. So, a tentative recommendation for me if this sort of thing is up your alley, and maybe I'm just an idiot and I overlooked something incredibly obvious, but hey, it is what it is. On to the next one. Okay, obviously we're switching gears from the previous 3 shoestring indie titles and moving up in terms of budget and presentation. And you may think this is unfair, but hey, I don't know the devs, they sent me a free key that I didn't ask for, and I never said there had to be a thematic consistency between the games I cover, so I've included it because in my mind, it absolutely fulfills the criteria I've set up for this series, so there you go. So, my first reaction to seeing this game was, okay, this is gonna be one of those games that have, very pretty, cutesy graphics, but are just dull and boring on the inside, like every game ever released by Daedalic Entertainment. The opening scene certainly seemed to confirm my worst fears. A cartoony opening where a ridiculously dressed scientist dude tries to launch his pile of shit homebrewed rocket from his rooftop to impress a cheeky, cutesy journalist, and then he falls off the rooftop and lands jaw first on solid concrete, but then just gets up and dusts himself off as if he just tripped over the curb. So I was ready to pack this in after I performed the perfunctory motions of getting past the quote-unquote tutorial part of the game. And then something interesting happens. A strange holographic recording device drops from the ceiling, and all of a sudden the game turns into this Indiana Jones-esque track down Elroy's long-lost father thing, and the mysterious otherworldly artifact he was excavating when he disappeared. And suddenly the game had my interest, so I kept playing thinking that, the penny was going to drop any minute now and I'd get bored with a series of nonsensical moon logic puzzles and boring, never-ending, badly written conversations with NPCs, and that didn't happen. In fact, the game just kept getting more and more interesting. And once Peggy, the plucky reporter, discovers a dimensional rift on the 13th floor of an office tower, I was sold. The game was already impressing me with its above-average character animation and astonishingly solid voice acting, but after this bit with the ghostly apparition and the subsequent heist to recover a mysterious crystal artifact from the crooked mayor's office, I was sold. I surrendered, and I decided to just play through the entire thing. The puzzles never veer off into moon logic or even cartoon logic. I mean, sure, a space blanket can apparently cool down this big fuck-off diesel generator, a cluster of bats can be scared away by an old radio making annoying noises, and our man Elroy here can run fast enough to catch up to a moving train, so we're not going for realism, but I never once got stumped and had to reach for a walkthrough. Even the logic puzzles were pretty simple. Some of them were even kind of fun, like this mirror puzzle late in the game. These honeycomb puzzles overstay their welcome by showing up way too frequently, and I never really managed to figure out their rules, so anyway, they can be brute forced fairly simply, so whatever. The humor stays lighthearted for the most part, but it never gets cringy or forced, probably because even when it almost teeters on that brink, like with this segment where you have to sub in as an actor in a rubber suit for a terrible theater production, the voice acting just sells it so well, and no shit, this scene, which you would think was just a prolonged side gag, turns out to actually tie into the bigger story in a surprisingly poignant way. It even gets a bit dark at times. Elroy unwittingly ends up as a contestant in a race where the goal is to not get eaten by one of these gigantic slugs, and the devs carefully skirt around making this unnecessarily dark and quote-unquote edgy by having the other two contestants, who obviously have to die in order for Elroy to win, be a robot and an anthropomorphic stick of broccoli. That's fucking genius if you ask me. Meanwhile, the emotional parts of the game mercifully never descend into the sort of manipulative, tug-on-the-heartstrings melodrama shit that most games would be tempted to do. Elroy never breaks down into a blubbering mess about how much he misses his dad, and even the part where they actually meet up again is understated, and it doesn't wallow or beat you over the head with how emotional it's supposed to be. Instead, it just lets the characters' facial animations do most of the talking. The game does take other little stabs at the heart, like this robot you have to keep from decommissioning himself, essentially committing suicide, until he can blow himself up in a suitable place to advance the plot, but not before you actually get a bit emotionally attached to the little fucker. And then there's this little alien kid whose parents are obviously dead, but he keeps playing his flute because his mom and dad used to love it when he played the flute, and he's hoping that if he just keeps playing it, they'll come back. I mean, god damn. But no one pointlessly sacrifices themselves, and there are no grand speeches trying to hammer in a point that the developers really, really want you to take away from the game. The closest you get are a few throwaway lines about you can't change the past, you just gotta make the most of what you got, and that's about it. Games like this often struggle to balance humor, emotional elements, story, and puzzles, and often one or two will end up taking a lot more focus than the other, but Elroy actually manages to walk this tightrope very well. The puzzles don't bog you down in areas, the comedy isn't as cartoony as the art style might lead you to think, and as I said, the emotional moments aren't overplayed. That's a difficult balance to achieve, so big props to the developers for that. Also, there are 3 different endings to the game, and all you have to do to see all of them is to just make a simple choice right at the end. But what I thought was particularly impressive about this is that there is no bad ending. All of the endings are, in fact, good endings. Different outcomes, yeah, but none of them actually result in, like, utter catastrophe or failure or whatever. So I gotta say, I'm really impressed with this game. I haven't really got much more to say about it, so, let me just sum this up real quick. Suffer through the underwhelming opening scenario and stick with it for a bit. It didn't take long for it to win me over, and that was surprising since I honestly went into this thinking I was gonna hate it, or at least be disappointed that it was all flash and no substance, because the last time I got my hopes up about a modern adventure game was Prim, and that was a huge letdown that I bailed on after only an hour. Elroy and the Aliens, on the other hand, might be the best modern adventure game I've played in recent memory. The only thing that disappointed me just a little teeny tiny bit was that they never got around to explaining how this Princess Leia hologram cube thing ended up in Elroy's roof, which seemed like a bit of a plot hole, but maybe I just missed something and... plot hole. Like, it's literally a hole that dumps plot on you? Dude, if that was intentional, that's actually pretty clever. So, would I recommend this game? Abso-fucking-lutely! And that about does it. Now, just to head you off at the pass, no, I don't think games need to have massive production value and shiny, colorful graphics to blow me away. Like I said, devs with such talents often seem to focus way too much on presentation and not enough on crafting a game that's actually really fun to play. And I think Brownie's adventures in War of the Wormholes show that you can get by on just good humor or good puzzle design, respectively, without having a flashy presentation. So, unless you happen to drop the ball on literally every front, like Love Me or Die does, then you can still craft an interesting game that's worth playing. Sure, it's going to be a harder sell because, and this feels weird to say, but it's true, the adventure game market is honestly pretty oversaturated at this point, and the average consumer just looks at the screenshots and decides whether or not to buy a game because they think it looks pretty. And that sounds like I'm calling the average consumer a shallow fucking bastard, but that's only because it's true. Anyway, that's it for now. Devs, feel free to send me more games if you dare. I can't promise I'll ever get around to playing them, and I definitely can't promise I'll be kind to them even if you do, but you could take a gamble, or whatever. Listen, I'm gonna be upfront with you. Every time I make one of these showcase videos, they get next to no views at all, so whatever exposure you think you're gonna get is honestly pretty negligible, but I'm just saying, that's up to you. Anyway, fuck it. If you're one of those viewers who actually watched this video all the way to the end and got something meaningful out of my recommendations, then thanks very much. And until next time, I'll see you around the Chrono Stream. Bye!